So my name's Janet Whitley. I'm from Collective Leadership for Scotland, and I think quite a few of you have been to these sessions before, but in case there's anybody who's new, the current sessions are offered through our Collective Leadership for Renewal programme. And this morning, I'll be hosting the session along with Martin Kalungu-Banda from the Presencing Institute and Verena Albrecht from the Collective Leadership for Scotland team. So the purpose of these sessions is very much about creating a space and an opportunity for some deeper reflection amongst colleagues, really recognising the particular times that we're working in just now, and the fact that actually very often we don't have that time to pause, to reflect and to connect together, and particularly around the really important leadership questions. So recognising that the sorts of leadership that we might want to be thinking about for future generations requires a different kind of thinking and sometimes a different kind of knowing that enable us to really understand how we need to be developing. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to the session this morning, but also other sessions through the programme that I know that many of you have already taken advantage of. But in fact, you're welcome to just drop in as you please, and to be part of the sessions and to participate as much as possible. What I would say in terms of the session this morning, given the nature of the work, and particularly the work that we're going to be doing in breakout groups, it's really helpful if you feel able to have your camera on so that people can engage more fully in the session. So if you feel comfortable, I feel it would be really helpful to have your cameras on. If there's any issues with that, then obviously using the chat function is always a helpful way to communicate with colleagues if it's not possible for you to do that. But for the work today and the kind of work that we're going to be doing, I would suggest it's particularly helpful to have your cameras on for that work as we get into it. So in fact, the other sessions that are available do offer wider opportunities for practice and wider opportunities for creativity and for experimentation. But what we should perhaps do now is make a start on the session this morning. It's really about how we can become more action confident in times of disruption. So I'll hand over now to Martin, who's going to take us through some introduction on that.
Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to connect today. And as Janet said, today we are focusing on how can we be more action confident. And we think that we become more action confident through prototyping our own way of being and showing up, but also through experimentation with the ideas, thoughts we have for the change we want to see in our own lives, in our work environment, the communities where we live, and the world at large. Permit me to show you some slides to just talk more about what I'm sharing. So we go back to the notion of intention. Someone said, intention is not the most powerful force. It is the only force. Everything we see around us, from the chair we are sitting on to the technology we are using to connect this morning, arose out of intention by someone or by a group of persons. Some people extend it even to the existence of the universe and say it first occurred as an intention in whoever is the origin or creator of the universe. Intention is not the most powerful force. It is the only force. And it's an invitation to pay a little bit more attention to our own intentions. Intention matters. If you remember the often quoted thought from Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So, how do we then move from intention to action? What we are learning is that prototyping, experimentation is what helps. And in fact, when you think about the times in which we are living, when we cannot foresee what tomorrow, let alone next week and next year would look like, the most sensible thing to do when we want to continue being facilitators, shapers of change, is through the concept of prototyping. So what is prototyping? It is the exploration of the possible future through experiments. A prototype goes through many iterations, try and error. It is based on the feedback from stakeholders. And the principle guiding the prototyping process is fail often early in order to succeed sooner. So failing is part of the deal. And then we stop and listen when we have acted. We stop and listen to the feedback arising from those that are stakeholders in what we are doing. It might be ourselves, family members, our co-workers, the community in which we live. And it's that feedback from the stakeholders that allows us to refine the original concept so that we can move to the next. It is the lessons we learn from prototyping that allow us to either scale up or institutionalize our idea or practice, make it part of the normal fabric of how we, our families, organizations, and communities do things. So, I am trying to share that prototyping is a way of building action confidence. Change does not happen simply because we thought about it. We have seen this in our own lives. We see this in our society. Change happens when our thought is taken into action. But because we don't have a crystal ball of what will work and not work, that's why prototyping, experimentation is, in this particular case, a sensible way for exploring the future. Action confidence arises because I have tried something. It might be a way of showing up as a member of a family, community, workplace. Maybe I'm practicing mindfulness, meditation. Maybe I'm trying to push the boundaries of my capacity for listening, for engaging in dialogue with other people that together we can discover something new and better. So, whatever it is that I or we are doing, when we learn to do it at a small, safe space, eventually gives us the confidence to take bigger steps. I wanted to share with you this little video of Andrea Bocelli and Sarah Brightman singing together. As you may know, Andrea comes from a background of shouldn't be, because when the mother was expecting him, the doctors that were supporting her said, your child will not be all right. Maybe to save the child and yourself from a lot of pain, you can abort the child. Somehow the young mother insisted that she wanted to carry the baby. Andrea was born, and eventually they noticed that he had a problem with his sight and he was going to become blind very soon. And he did. He loved singing. But somehow his parents thought what would bring him a little bit of recognition, dignity in society would be if he did something really important. And they persuaded him to go to the law school because a lawyer might have good standing in society. And that wasn't Andrea Bocelli's intention. It wasn't his will, but somehow, out of respect for parents, he went to the law school, graduated as if to say to his parents, now that I've given you the law degree, can I now go and do what I love most? This is what Andrea Bocelli does. But he arises from mean experiments of try and error, not knowing who he was going to be, not what he was going to do. But then he discovered this is what life threw him into the world to do. And around him are people who give him the confidence to do this.
sei lontana, sogno all'orizzonte, manca le parole. E io sì lo so che sei con me, con me. Tu mia luna, tu sei qui con me. Mio sole, tu sei qui con me, con me, con me, con me. Time to say goodbye. Paesi che non ho mai veduto e vissuto con te. Adesso si rivivrò con te. Partirò su navi per mari e io lo so, non esistono più. Con te io li rivivrò, con te partirò. Su navi per mari e io lo so, non esistono più. Con te io li rivivrò, con te partirò.
I hope you enjoyed the video, but I suppose in terms of what that evoked for you, we thought it might be helpful next to spend just a few moments doing some journaling. Now, I know that many of you are very familiar with a journaling practice, and really it's just an opportunity for you to quickly write down, in a sense, whatever it is that comes out of your pen in response to a couple of questions. So if you've got a pen or pencil and some paper handy, and just make yourself comfortable and just really create a moment for yourself to reflect on what's come up for you in watching that video. So the first question is, what struck you? What struck you? And I'll time and let you know when we're moving to the next question. Okay, if you want to just finish what you're writing, and we'll move on to the next question, which is what is seeking to emerge that you need to explore by doing or prototyping? What is seeking to emerge that you need to explore by doing or prototyping? Okay, if you want to just finish what you're writing, and you might want to just take a moment to allow to digest what it is that's come up for you. So just make sure you're sitting comfortably. Maybe take a couple of deep breaths just to allow to kind of digest what you've been journaling about. And I think really what we're interested now is what's come up for you. Any observations from those questions or from what you've heard so far? So really an open invitation for anybody to share any thoughts or comments or questions that might have come up from the session so far, from the question.
Janet, I just wanted to, I think it was Una who talked about the challenge of experimentation, prototyping when you are in a leadership role and people are looking up to you. The only guess I could give, and arising from learning and reading about what one of the leaders has done in these challenging times, Prime Minister Jacinda of New Zealand. So she is said to be successful, among those few that are successful in mobilizing their countries to combat or respond appropriately to the COVID-19 pandemic, partly because, one, she acknowledged publicly that this was overwhelming and none of them as leaders had the answers. But she then moved to that government or different positions are best suited for mobilizing those that are really gifted, capable, knowledgeable, to begin to explore meaningfully the new phenomenon. And that's how she leaned into scientists. She leaned into community mobilizers. She leaned into medical professionals and people around her to listen, to encourage open, honest dialogue, and that people shouldn't pretend they know when they don't. because that will stand in the way of discovering what's possible. And being open to the reality that in the process of knowing the unknown, there will be mistakes done. But if everybody is open and honest, the learning becomes faster and cheaper, and you risk less lives. So somehow there is something about leaders being vulnerable, acknowledging that, like everybody else around them, they don't know, but they happen to be in a position by virtue of their role where they can convene others so that together they increase the capacity for knowing faster early. That's what I thought I could share to that important element, because leaders have an extra burden in experimentation. It's not as easy as myself who is working by my own. A leader is responsible for many lives, for many jobs, for many things. And therefore, experimentation doesn't come easy. And yet, they can use their position to foster quick learning.
Case Martin's going to take us into a little bit more input just now. Thank you, everyone, though.
Thank you for the sharing and reflections and insights. May I now just remind you about some of the things that we are aware of, but rarely bring particularly into the professional arena. Or at least I speak for myself, when I'm in a professional environment, I can tend to disembody. I rely on what is just above my shoulders, the brain, the mind, because that's what I've been trained to do, to think, to analyze. And that is essential. But it is only part of the story. And it is, with a bit of hindsight, an underutilization of this thing called me. Me are not only, or is not only my thoughts, it's my entire body. One of our teachers in the Presencing Institute community, by the name of Arawana Hayashi, says, we do not just know with our brain, with our mind. Our whole body is an antenna for accessing deeper knowing. But somehow through our training, through our job processes and matrices, we tend to focus on that above the shoulders. It is like what one time professor at Oxford once said, Ken Robinson, when he looked at his professorial colleagues, he couldn't help thinking as they walked that they treated their bodies as a transportation mechanism for the brain. That's all they cared about. It was like making sure the brain is protected and taken care of. Indeed, they have produced a lot of admirable things out of deep thinking. But all of us know from traditional wisdoms, from our own experiences and practices, that there are times when it is not that part of us that cracks, that challenge, that problem, or generates that insight we need to move on, to help, to organize things differently. Our whole body is an antenna for accessing deeper knowing. But we rarely lean into this antenna. Second, again coming from Arawana Hayashi, she says, being stuck or stuckness is not a problem. Stuckness is a gift. It's a gift indicating our next possible evolution. It is like what Eileen said about her current job. And that you start feeling, I have done this over and over. It's a kind of stuckness. And yet, if you choose, you can apply for a new role. Or if it doesn't work, you can, and I'm using her own words here, you can look at the same job with a fresh pair of eyes. But if we learn to listen into the body, we can see where the stuckness, one, is warning us to pay attention to. Two, it might provide some clues of what is possible next. And let me not so much talk about this. Allow me to stand up and just practice this. Hopefully you can see me and hear me wherever you are. So each point of stuckness can have an expression in the body. I will embody one of my key stucks or stuckness. And I hope you will have some stuckness in your life, in your work to sort of work with. I haven't met many people who don't have any stuckness, but if you don't have any, I might lend you some. I probably have more than I can bear. So I will listen to my body and embody one of my key stuckness. I will be talking through as I do this. When you do the practice yourself, you don't have to, you shouldn't talk about it. I'm doing it in order to provide an example. But when we invite you to try this out in small groups, you do it in silence. So this is one of my key areas of stuckness. Then I lean into that so that I intensify the feel of it. The body experiences intensity of the magnification of that stuckness. And then I stay in that stuckness for a few seconds. And because stuckness is not sustainable, no one remains stuck permanently. At some point, movement will start. And you notice where the movement begins. And you go on with the movement until it has a natural stop. And when it stops, you give it a sentence or a word, not more. In this particular case, my sentence is at peace. And then when you finish, one person finishes, then those who were witnessing the stuckness, then they say, anything I saw, I noticed, I felt, Again, it is very short sentences. I saw, I noticed, I sensed, or I felt. Then a little pause of a few seconds, and then the next person stands up, and then they go through the movement of embodying their stuckness, stretching that stuckness a bit more. And then when they lean into that, there will be a natural resolution. And people who are observing are paying attention to where the movement might be beginning from. And then the evolution of stuckness to resolution will unfold. And at the end, when it has settled, a word or a sentence from the person who embodied the stuckness, then sit, and then the observers or witnesses, they say, I saw, I noticed, I sensed, I felt. There is roughly about 4 minutes per person.
In which case, it's really just an opportunity to say a little bit about how that was. And I shouldn't perhaps generalise for what I'm feeling, but I guess in a way the experience in the small group felt so powerful. In a way, I feel I'm still kind of absorbing that, and it also felt quite intimate with that little group. So in terms of actually sharing that, even though we're not a huge group, it feels there was something quite special that went on in that little group that I'm not quite sure it's all been processed yet. But certainly my experience, although I've done that kind of thing before, I've certainly never done it online. And I think it always throws up something different and something new. And really listening to what Ailsa was saying about, well, I wasn't entirely convinced about this, but actually, even just in those few moments, giving it a try, I felt I learned something, and I feel quite privileged to experience the learning in my little group. So I guess that's partly what's going on for me just now. But anybody who feels like saying something, of course, you're very welcome.
I felt like that working with Martin and Una. I mean, they can speak for themselves. It was quite profound. The sense of vulnerability displayed, and even if you are just observing another person's starkness and possible resolution, it's like it is also opening something within myself. And when Verena pulled us back, I was just sharing about something that came from Una's question or Una's comment around the possibility of doing the same practice alone without camera. And I shared that I do that when I have an issue I want to lean into. And sometimes as I say the sentence or word, it doesn't click. But in the course of the day or the week, then something pops up. It's like I had commissioned my body to keep working at this when I am on my own journey with my brain. And I also shared that there are times when I experience that I am moving from stuckness to a deeper stuckness. And that is also fine. That it's possible that my next shape feels even more stuck. It's not always that I get a resolution, but I know that even in the second stuckness, I have to lean into that. It will eventually also find its own resolution. Sometimes the passage to the resolution is another stuckness. That's when Verena pulled us back into the meeting. I just wanted to share that.
I think it is an interesting question, actually, in terms of whether being in a digital space does somehow feel slightly more protected. Although we're still together. There's something about being in our own environments, being witnessed. I wonder if that does create a greater sense of safety than being in a room together. It's just maybe something to reflect on a little bit further. So thank you very much, everyone. I don't know if there's anything further anybody would like to say, or any questions or thoughts that anybody would like to leave us with before we finish for the day. I think really the checkout question that we thought would be very, very useful at this point was really around my action confidence practice will be on, I guess, share with us what it will be on. So from what you've experienced this morning, from what you've seen, from what you've embodied, and what you've heard, and what you've talked about together, what's your sense of what your action confidence practice will be on as you leave today? And you're welcome to say something in the group, or if you want to pop something in the chat, then both are very much welcome just as we finish off. It would be nice to just hear from you where you feel you'll be taking this.
We also have 2 comments in the chat function. Douglas says, stilling my body and listening witness what occurs while standing. And Martin as well, who says, my action confidence is experiment with the concept that the body does not lie. We've got another comment from Una as well coming in around listening to my body, professionally leading from my heart. And Elsa says, use by body to feel, but recognize that solutions may come later on as a flash of inspiration.
All of these feel like, as with each one, they felt like a very poignant point with which we might draw the comments to a close. So thank you for all of those. Cumulatively, they all feel very, very powerful. And I would certainly personally just like to thank you all for stepping in and leaning in. The practice today, however you might have been feeling about it, it's felt very powerful for as witness and as participant. I can speak from my own experience of that. So thank you for being here and enabling that to happen. And also thank you for being with us through the broader series. But this is the final leadership conversation that we've got scheduled at present, but there are still other practices and other offerings that are available through Collective Leadership for renewal. There's guided journaling that's offered every Thursday, which is, I guess we're all familiar now with that concept, as well as a number of workshops that are still available around our images for renewal, which we've been gathering, and also a creative and experimental workshop. I guess what we're trying to do is get a sense of what is needed at this time by colleagues across our kind of wider communities. So anybody that feels like they would like a conversation, or if they would like to feed into our process of discerning what we might do next, then we would be really delighted to hear from you. So really just thank you all very much, and thanks to my colleagues Martin and Verena for hosting this morning.